Neema Parvini, welcome back to Thinking Class. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks very much, John. And as I said on a video recently, I wish to be introduced on all shows now as a man of letters.
Well, we can start all over again and do man of letters, Mr. Neema Parvini.
No, it's all right. I love the idea of a 19th century man of letters. In Thomas Carlyle's On Heroes and Hero Worship, he has a whole section on men of letters. I'm like, hold on, kings, poets, men of letters. You know, I don't know what I want to be, a man of letters. So.
Yeah, Thomas
anyway,
Carlyle.
How you doing, John?
Very well, very well. Thomas Carlyle. Well, I'm sure he and some of his ideas will end up popping up throughout a discussion. But his work really is very compelling. I actually got very obsessed with it, having read your book, The Prophets of Doom, and for various reasons, I think it is pretty instructive to those of us who are so much further along from the rise of the industrial mindset, so to speak. There's all of that, but as you've written in your works, he really does help you understand the reality of the great men of history, that it really does. It really is a thing that people can impose their will upon events. And as we spoke about earlier on in the year in February, that civilizations, whether that it's their vitality or the opposite, right? They're their malaise. It's driven by the cultural elite, so to speak, or the elite class. And so I think we should. That's a perfect segue. You've inadvertently pushed me into a segue about your new book, which is Applied Elite Theory, which we've mentioned Prophets of Doom. Before that was Populist Delusion, in which you made the argument that this idea that there is a democracy that is driven by the people is it's a mirage, that there is only ever one class that rules over another class, and whether you like it or not, we're all ruled over by an organized minority. So you came up with all of this work on the back of reading some of the great figures of the past who were all from varying different periods and looking at different historical trends themselves. So this is through analysis and observation. It's what you call a value-free analysis. So let's bring it back to the present then. We've got the rise of populist movements here in the United Kingdom, Reform UK. We see it on the continent with Jordan Bardella in place of Marine Le Pen. We've got the alternative for Germany in Germany, of course. And then we've got, we've seen MAGA rise in Trump 2.0. Let's start talking about this in the applied aspect then. Where are the populist delusions within each of those movements, Neema?
Yeah, well, I should say that we are talking about my new book, of course, Applied Elite Theory.
Okay, there's a well-thumbed version just to show that I've really read it.
So, yeah, I mean, really, this new book, Applied Elite Theory, is a lot about how these populist movements that you just mentioned have already, in some ways, been captured by various organized minorities, if not by the regime, what we call the regime itself. I mean, in this country, it's been obvious for some time to me that the system is fine with a figure like Nigel Farage coming in, and that Reform UK are not going to be a revolutionary force, even if it's going to destroy the Tory party, which remains to be seen. I noticed the Financial Times was talking about a merger recently. Over in America, Trump 2.0 has been frankly shocking, the extent to which it is obvious that he has been captured, and that America First is not really America First, but is actually about certain special interests, which we can talk about or not. And it strikes me that the same thing is true of many of the populist figures in Europe. Geert Wilders is a good example. He, I would say, is not really for the Dutch people first. He's for other people first. You know, you mentioned this guy in France. I mean, last I checked, Le Pen is not allowed to run. Is that right? But, you know, whenever the original person is then now now it's some other person. I already think that Le Pen had moderated herself to the point where whatever was edgy, whatever was threatening to the system, as embodied in a figure like her father, has already been kind of rounded, skimmed off. She's already moderated. This is called the iron law of oligarchy.
Mm.
So yeah, and really, what this book does is it explains the process of the iron law of oligarchy in practice, and how or why so often these figures that get everybody excited end up being disappointing, or end up not doing the things that they promise to do when they're in power. I mean, as we're recording this, everybody's talking about America, going to war with Venezuela. I mean, this is very different from the Trump who was boasting about stopping the war with Russia in day one.
Mm.
And now he's basically kind of doing neo-imperialism, neocon with a MAGA hat. You know, as it appears on issue after issue, he sides with special interests against the interests of his base, which has unfortunately been the story of Trump 2.0. I really struggle at this point. We're in December now, so pretty much after a year, the data's in. The story's already told, and even the greatest cope merchants online, like Captive Dreamer is one I like to pick on. Even he is taken off the MAGA hat. Even he is finding it an embarrassment to be associated with this cavalcade of betrayal. So, yeah.
Well, I think we should definitely get into those ideas that figures like Nigel Farage and the party Reform UK is really containment. But perhaps before we get there, let's pick up on some of these threads that we've started to talk about, like the regime in inverted commas, the system. I would say that for many people, those that are accused of conspiratorial thinking, there are quite a few people who think that strings are pulled behind the scenes. There are others who perhaps believe that politics in the public sphere is engaged in forthrightly, and the issues that are presented within the media and within the public sphere are to be fought over and to be won in the spirit of public debate. Whereas you argue within your books that much of what we see out in the public sphere is akin to pro wrestling. You refer to it as the kayfabe, a predetermined outcome,
Yeah.
theatrical moves. So perhaps you could unpack what you mean by the
Well,
regime.
the first thing I do is I'd strongly wish to criticize those people who want to start, claiming that these ideas are conspiratorial. Because at this point, there is no excuse. Dominic Cummings, who was as close as you can get to power, has come out and basically he's used these terms, kayfabe. He's explained in detail how things work in Downing Street. Boris Johnson did an interview in The Spectator, a video interview, where he basically explained that a lot of the things he wanted to do when he was the Prime Minister, he was, more or less told us he was taken to a dark room and told he had to do various things. Liz Truss, who was the shortest reigning Prime Minister ever, has come out and given interviews and said, look, basically, we were done in by the system. But Jeremy Corbyn, the former leader of the Labour Party, has done an interview where he said he was told in no uncertain terms, taken to a dark room, will you do a deal with us? And he was not prepared to do that. And he was, then destroyed as a political force, and continues to be destroyed. As we're recording this, is that your party thing has become a farce. So I would say that if people are going to if people are going to kind of maintain the fiction, it's almost like, speaking to a child who is being shown evidence that wrestling isn't real, right? And the child saying, "No, it is real. It's still real to me. It's still real to me." And you're literally bringing out wrestlers, telling you, look, it is scripted, guys. It is performance. So to me, at this point in 2025, I'd say it's childish, bordering on negligent to maintain the view that there aren't unseen, forces that we don't see on camera on TV working, in the halls of power. There, it's obvious, and they've
Yeah.
told us. So that would be my one-shot answer to that.
Well, you've also written extensively about Tony Blair and his
Mhm.
enduring influence after his years as Prime Minister in the United Kingdom. And you say he's the human embodiment of the regime. Maybe we can touch on that so people can understand this influence that he has.
Well, I mean, Tony Blair, after leaving, he ceased to be the prime minister in 2007. I don't know if you can remember, there was a big ceremony where there was a changing of the guard, and Gordon Brown came in as the prime minister. That was quite a surreal day because they did it in such a symbolic and kind of pompous way. There was like an actual changing of the guards, um, to show Labour unity or whatever. But after that point, he immediately, Tony Blair, did not go and retire and play golf like so many other politicians. He did not join the House of Lords like many former prime ministers, but set about building a power network outside of, Westminster, with various NGOs. Those NGOs were then consolidated in a super NGO called the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, which is now the biggest NGO of all of them. And he remains a looming figure over our politics, left or right, over the Tory party and the Labour Party. Um, and we've seen it since Labour have become the government.
Uh,
Uh, One of Blair's obsessions has been digital ID or ID cards back in the day. He is constantly pushing for the government to adopt AI, to invest in AI, to adopt digital technology and various other things. He has certain financial backers too. Bill Gates, famously, Larry Ellison is another one. And Labour, before they came to power, did not put digital ID in their manifesto. The day after they came in, they uh, defied Blair and said, "We are not going to do this." Then all of a sudden, they did do it. All of a sudden, Blair's plan was being enacted by the government. 4 million people signed a petition to say, hold on a second, you didn't consult us. There hasn't been a debate. You're just going to bring this in without, it wasn't even in. And I think they are, after you reach a million threshold of signatures, the government has to respond. And they responded on that petition by saying, yeah, we're not going to debate it, and it's going to come in. So hard cheese. So it seems to me that this is the most naked example of Blair basically just setting the agenda and representing the permanent managerial class. What he says tends to be the thing that happens, regardless of who's in power. Now, he doesn't always get his own way. For
yeah.
example, during COVID, Blair wanted there to be a kind of demarcation between the anointed and the benighted, between the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. He couldn't understand why unvaccinated people were still being permitted into polite society. He branded them as idiots and openly called for there to be segregated spaces. That didn't actually happen. So he doesn't always get his own way, but he
Mm.
was pushing for it.
Yeah, I mean, there seem to be myriad examples within the current Labour government of the influence of those that are back Tony Blair. I think you've mentioned Gates and Ellison, and I think Starmer made a big thing within the press about these meetings held at some of the grace and favour properties that are available to British government parliamentarians, and uh, Ellison and Gates were both um, pushing their sustainable agriculture, sustainable finance, renewable energy agenda, and within days, we saw Miliband's ramping up of changing legislation for solar farms, as well as on, of course, farmers try and make it economically unviable for our farmers to be able to stay where they are, and force them into having to sell lands to pay these taxes to the state. So it's I'm trying to think of who it was that said it, whether it was you might know better than I, maybe it's just a total diversion, but there are those who've written extensively about the kind of deluge of information and the demoralization of people that stop them from being able to connect the dots between news items. And so they read news items as though they're within isolation, that they're just these anomalous events. It's people reacting to these things. But actually, you can see, if you're able to connect some of these news items, the social imaginary that has captivated our ruling class, or the agenda of the ruling class. And maybe actually we at least start to uncover the worldview that has dominated. And it has been referred to, and I heard it from you first, the Boomer Truth regime. And a recent guest of mine, Martin Zellner, also brought this up in conversation. And you wrote in Applied Elite Theory that between 1945 and 2024, the rulers of Britain, the USA, and the West more broadly were arrested by a set of moral visions and a kind of collective dream which came to dominate all their thoughts and actions. Discuss. What was this collective dream?
Well, I mean, it's really the term set by World War II, the outcome of World War II, but also, even more so, I would argue, the cultural revolutions of the 1960s. And the way I've described it is the two figures of John Lennon and Winston Churchill side by side doing that together, okay? And essentially what John Lennon wants, he outlined in the Boomer anthem. Imagine there's no countries, it's easy if you try, all the people of the world joining hands together, there's no religion, there's nothing to kill or die for, all of this sort of stuff. He has another song called God, which is even more nihilistic, where he's saying, I don't believe in Beatles, I don't believe in Buddha, I don't believe in Jesus, I just believe in me, Yoko and me. So kind of truly kind of apex individualism, almost a nihilistic individualism, which has no limit, has no constraints. Just this morning, John, I've been compiling, I did this thing called 80s bangers better than Madonna, and now people are demanding a 90s one. So I've actually spent the morning looking at 90s music, which is, I have to do less research on because I was a teenager in the 90s. I remember it. And I mean, almost every song hits on the theme of almost unlimited freedom and kind of hedonistic excess. I mean, in a case of something like Too Unlimited, there's no limits, or Freed from Desire, that Gala song. I mean, but it doesn't really matter where you go in the culture, that it's excessively individualistic, and then even nihilistic. If you get into 90s music, the grunge side of it is kind of self-pitying and nihilistic and whiny. But it doesn't really matter where you go, which genre you go to, whether it's the dance or the pop or the rock or the rap. It's all kind of an unconstrained individualism is what I'd call it. Okay, which is where the vision of John Lennon goes, and the role of Winston Churchill, or the Winston Churchill side of the equation, is to protect that. It is to protect John Lennon. So Churchill is the kind of shield. Anybody who wants to attack the Lennon vision, the unlimited individualism, is always already Hitler, is always already a Nazi. and your job as Winston Churchill is to fight Nazis wherever they are, to
Mm.
punch Richard Spencer, whatever it is, okay? Um, and that, in a nutshell, is the boomer truth regime. And then, of course, in foreign policy, that manifests as, well, we want to export the John Lennon dream everywhere around the world. Okay, we need to. It's really not all right that those Chinese and those Muslims over there are not engaging in the unlimited drug-fueled sex party, right? They're not doing the raves, and that's a problem. So we need to bomb them. We need to, and if they're going to be horrible dictators all around the world resisting the John Lennon vision, then as the always Churchill, we have to bomb the always Hitler. And the always Hitler is who? I mean, at the moment is Vladimir Putin and Maduro in Venezuela, but in the past it's been, the Ayatollah or Saddam Hussein or Slobodan Milosevic or Stalin at one point. Doesn't really matter who it is. They are the forces of non-freedom, the forces of totalitarian dictatorship. They are against our John Lennon vision. Therefore, we must bomb them. That is the Winston Churchill side.
Mm.
And really, Tony Blair, who, if you remember when he became prime minister, was the first prime minister who grew up listening to the Beatles, literally with a guitar. Do you remember Blair had a guitar? Perfectly embodies this, if you think about it, because, he stands for all of those socially liberal things that we talked about, but he's also like probably the most insane neocon ever to, he's never even, don't forget, Blair wanted to bomb Mugabe in Zimbabwe, and it was George Bush saying, hold on, Tony, now, there's a bit much tone. And if you listen to Blair, we should have never pulled out of Afghanistan. We should have finished the job there. He hasn't seen a place he doesn't want to bomb. Um, you know, and this is it basically. This is that in a nutshell is the boomer truth regime. And I should stress for a lot of people, it really has nothing to do with actual Hitler, actual Churchill. It's more the kind of cartoon version of those things that exist in people's minds that then justify all of this other way, all of these other things that we've been talking about.
Mm.
It's why the left saw it as such an affront that people were against the trans issue, right? I mean, to a lot of people, that was the most extreme end, the most absurd end. Upturning thousands of years of people saying, well, there are men and women. Actually, no. If you're a man, you can become a woman. I can be born as a woman, just born in the wrong body. Who are you, John, to tell me that I'm not a woman? And if you tell me that I'm not a woman, that's you being Hitler, and I have to fight you as a Nazi. You see how so even on something absurd like that, that's the kind of sharp end of it. But it's like that on every single issue. And then these things, they try to enshrine them almost as a kind of religious codex. Therefore, in America, things like, you get quasi-religious figures like Martin Luther King or, the Civil Rights Act being enshrined now as this thing that we must always protect. Any step backwards against those things is automatically Nazism. That's
Mm.
it in a nutshell.
Well, thinking about that particular example, even though it's been stretched, I suppose, beyond recognition now, is thinking about the ideas that have taken hold with regards to multiculturalism. I know you have made the point previously elsewhere that actually things like ethnic preference is real and it drives people. And I'm not sure these were your words to paraphrase, but others have, which is often universalism is used as a cloak in which to advance ethnic interests or your own religious interests, which are invariably tied to an ethnic group. So thinking about the story behind the hard multiculturalism or the asymmetric multiculturalism that someone like Professor Eric Kaufmann would talk about, and which I think we can see in action in the United Kingdom, where host population suppressed, don't want any of that out there. That's why there's been such a pushback against the flags going up talking about, as you said, this is making people uncomfortable, it's Nazism, whatever. But this is all downstream of having celebrated every other culture and people and their religious ceremonies and all the rest of it. The question I've got for you then is, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Is it that you have the organized minority of ruling elites that are concerned with creating a global village, one in which we'll trade freely and we move around freely and it's a cosmopolitan utopia, that have pushed this on everyone? Is it actually because there has been a transfer of large ethnic diasporas into countries that are organizing themselves and then are getting close to seats of power, or just being intransigent and saying this is what we want for our own people and it informs the policy? Or is this not an either or thing? Is this a both and, they're both working together?
Well, I mean, I think the second group that you talk about there's a certain degree of opportunism, and there's a certain degree of just what Karl Marx said, we find that we can't really choose the conditions that we find ourselves in, but you do have control over what you do in them, right? So to a certain extent, the second group of people you said, you mentioned there, are just trying to do the best they've got with what they've been dealt, right? So you can't, I don't, I have a kind of less negative view of those people because they're just doing what they're going to do, okay? Really, I would like to put all the focus on our rulers, our ruling class, and the set of assumptions or the set of ideas that have got us here. I also think, I think it's important to stress, and I know not everybody agrees with me on this, but I think that in their heart of hearts, they would prefer the different ethnic groups to lose their specific character. They would actually prefer everybody to join the melting pot, and you can retain some residue of your indigenous character, okay, your Indianness, or your, I don't know, if you're in America, your blackness or whatever, okay, they'll let you retain some version of that, but it has to be reduced to the level of the theme park. It's like, well, if you're Mexican, that's very nice. You can have your nachos and your Taco Bell or whatever, but really the bottom line is you have to join everyone else in the big gay disco. And so sometimes you see tension between, I guess, what you'd call kind of ethnically driven minority figures in the leftist coalition, whether it's Muslims in this country or black nationalists in America, who just want what's best for their own people, which often comes with a kind of social conservatism, i.e. they don't want all the LGBT stuff. They want to maintain their traditions. They want to just do what is best for them as they see it. There's often a tension between those people and the kind of universalists who want to, bring people into John Lennon world. And funny enough, that actually happened at the Your Party conference a couple of days ago, where they were playing John Lennon's Imagine. I'm not even making this up now. Sounds like I made it up. They were playing John Lennon's Imagine as an anthem, and the Muslims in the crowd said, hold on a second, he's saying Imagine there's no religion. We're hardcore Muslim, what are you doing? And it caused a problem within Your Party, because there you saw the core Boomer Truth value rubbing up against one of the client groups of the power structure that's built around Boomer Truth, which in this country is the so-called Muslim community. And they were at loggerheads, and you expect to see these fallings out more and more as it becomes clear that this vision is not going to stop. This, whatever it is that animates this, will not stop until it's destroyed every culture, every religion, every country. Cannot stand anything outside itself. That's why it has to bomb. Ideally, imagine a scenario now, right, where Vladimir Putin drops dead and Russia truly comes under the remit of the American empire. What do you think they'll do to Russia? What do you think you think they're going to install a leader who's for conservative values or Russian traditions and so on? Or are they going to want to try to do the same thing there that they've done here? And I think the answer to that is obvious. So to me, I mean, and lots of people disagree with this, because some people say, well, actually, the target is just white people all the time. I think the target is all of humanity, and it's just that it just so happens to hit white people first. I think in the end they'll come for everybody. They do not want those things that threaten it to exist, really. I mean, there was a great book written years ago called Jihad versus Muck World, which was about this. And I mean, the title sums it all up. All of those things that are not part of it are seen as jihad or seen as Nazi. And lo and behold, it's conflated. Islamo-fascism, they call it. Because it's just something, it's not one of me. It's not the McDonald's gay disco. So you understand what I'm saying, right?
So this is what the regime wants. I think people can recognize this, whether they find it in some of NATO's recent mission statements, and even Ukraine during the war, starting to field people in the kind of military general role that were effectively fully LGBT on message. So people can find these examples wherever they look. But as you've pointed out,
the
reality...
BLM flag in Afghanistan, that was the most ridiculous one. Yes. Afghanistan for George Floyd, do you remember that? Anyway.
So if reality is always going to bite back in the end, insofar as we found amongst the Muslim constituents at your party conference, that people's interests sometimes are insoluble, that they are always going to find a way of coming out. And this is to paraphrase you, have talked about how whilst Western nations have been busy importing large groups of people in who live a very different life according to different civilizational rules, and that there are many who think, well, that's just that. The game is up. We're headed into whatever this future is we're headed into. Is you've made the point that actually that's not going to happen, because the reality is people will begin to recognize their own interests across those more insoluble lines, and in the end they will be or the civilizational preference of those people will be reimposed. Where am I going with this? Well, I guess it's inescapable that at the moment we're having a pretty loud conversation, not just in the United Kingdom, but across the West, particularly the Anglosphere, about civic nationalism versus ethno-nationalism. The idea that we can create a civic nationalist unity amongst a wide group of people and all be under one flag, and we have to subscribe to a set of the values that are broadly aligned with Boomer Truth. Or there are those who say, well, actually, no, there's an ethno-cultural aspect to peoples, and it's better to recognize that and to run our countries on those bases. And they're typically the people who would call for remigration. So maybe you can unpack it a little bit more for the listeners and the viewers. What do you think the future holds on the basis of we are a very mixed up set of civilizations and peoples with different interests? And do you think that the future is irresolvable, that things will continue as they are, or when do those preferences come back to the fore?
I mean, I think the first thing to say is that I wouldn't be too, I mean, optimistic is probably not the right word, but I wouldn't underestimate the corrosive force of the dissolving acid that is liberalism. Okay. The Muslim community may look strong now compared to some other communities, but liberalism has a way of dissolving and destroying. And you can have a look. I mean, probably like the initial first case would be the Native Americans in America, who were strong, proud people. I think Tucker Carlson talked about this recently. But then they got hooked on drugs and alcohol and gambling, and they they were destroyed. They were destroyed. Like their kind of spirit was broken. You could argue, even though it's happened over a slower and longer period, that similar things have happened to the white population of America and the black population of America. Certainly, have had problems with all of those things. And to the people of Britain as well have also had this corrosive acid. And so that some of these other people have just had a shorter time of exposure to all of these things. To imagine that they will somehow overcome them where all of those other people did not, strikes me as a little bit, from their point of view, optimistic. I don't overlook the strength. I mean, you could look at a case like Germany, right? Look at Germany after they lost the World War II. They were pumped really heavily full of liberalism, and in fact, they had a double dose of it because it wasn't just the fall of the mid-century Germans, but also the fall of the Berlin Wall. David Hasselhoff on the wall, freedom and all that sort of stuff. The spirit of the 90s I was talking about. So Germany had a double dose of it. And so, and it's only just now starting to have different sorts of thoughts. So all I'm saying is that I don't count out, even though these forces are there, these ethnic interests and so on, don't count out the possibility of, even extremely ethnocentric groups. I happened to see a clip of this Jewish guy talking, and he said, well, look, 40% of the Jewish population of New York voted for Mamdani, a Muslim, and somebody who a certain section of the Jewish population sees a threat to them, because New York has historically been, and I'm thinking, right, okay, so these are people who are pretty, on any measure, ethnocentric, have a strong sense of themselves because of what happened in the 20th century, slight siege mentality because of what's happening in the Middle East at the moment. It's particularly heightened at the moment, and yet still under those conditions, you're getting a lot of them voting for Mamdani. So all I'm saying is that don't count liberalism out.
Interesting. So all of the talk of liberalism being dead, over, being shown to be unworkable, may well prove not to be the case.
It's just got a way of kind of rotting the soul, of kind of demoralizing and killing the kind of spirit of people. And it remains to be seen as to whether. I'll give you an example. Right, my dad is from Iran. They have an Islamic theocracy over there. An Islamic theocracy. They're literally run by radical Muslim clerics, and still, even there, they have a problem with degeneracy and drugs, and the extent to which quote unquote Western propaganda reaches the youth there, and you can see that it's seductive. It's seductive, and people go for it. Because it's the classic vices that the Aquinas talks about. The classic vices are the tools that liberalism uses to seduce, and it is seductive. That's why people go for
it. Well,
sex and drugs and rock and roll.
Yeah. Well, I suppose Paul Kingsnorth, who is obviously very large on Substack and has grown a big follower, now he refers to it, and he's borrowed this term from other people and written extensively about the machine, this idea that in the end we just can't quite put down the temptations of what we talked about, a lot of the individualism, the material accoutrement that makes our modern lives so cushy, and along the way we drop lots of other things that previously been very important to humans, like tradition and custom and ritual and all the rest of it. And I suppose that machine is driven by
look at the Indians who come over in such huge numbers. India is a country that has probably the richest religious and spiritual tradition anywhere in the world. Okay, going back thousands of years, and they also have a Brahmin caste, okay, or did have a Brahmin caste before Gandhi, who were there for hundreds of years. And yet, when they come over, it's the Manchester United top, it's the mobile phone, it's, you know, they're not exactly doing their gods proud.
Hmm.
Okay, and no, there could be some, but what I'm saying is that you have to acknowledge reality as it is, and that a lot of the people who come over very quickly get seduced by all of the things that make the West attractive.
Hmm.
So yeah, there's two ways to look at it, I would say. Yeah.
Hmm. Fascinating. Britain. Let's go to Britain specifically, and we've dropped a couple of breadcrumbs on this. You've referred in your writings to Reform UK and Farage as being containment, a continuation of the regime. That would surprise a lot of people who are seeing them as being a kind of a saviour, so to speak, for Britain, which is in a deep disarray. So, why is Reform UK containment?
Well, they've shown on issue after issue that they want to stay compliant with the mantras. I mean, you know, whether it's apologizing for various remarks made, the way they react to being called racist, the way that they have vetted various people. The most high-profile one was Rupert Lowe, who was kicked out of the party for reasons we still don't really understand. Various other people that we know who wanted to stand as reform candidates, vetted out, not compliant enough. And yeah, I mean, we've seen. I mean, it's not just Farage; it's Richard Tice and the other one, Lee Anderson. We've seen enough of these people to know exactly, unless they're playing this kind of long game of hiding power levels, it just looks like it's going to be the Tories all over again. Tell me I'm wrong. I mean, does anyone disagree? I don't really. You say people would be surprised.
Hmm.
I don't really come across. I'll be honest. I see thousands and thousands of people online,
Hmm.
both on Twitter and in my YouTube comments and just around the place. I don't really see that much excitement for Farage. I think people are wise to a lot of this stuff,
Hmm.
and he's getting default support in much the same way that Labour got default support because we hated the Tories so much with the 0 seats.
Hmm.
Do you remember? I mean, we just wanted to wreck the Tories. Well, now Labour are so hated, and the Tories are still so hated. Whereas, well, Nigel's kind of winning by default. But I don't see in him. He's cautious. He's just so cautious. I don't see the kind of, speaking of Carlyle, the man of heroic will that's going to
Hmm.
be prepared to do what it takes to save the country, even
Hmm.
on a legislative front, even on a. I mean, I did an interview recently with Harrison Pitt where I said, well, there are no checks and balances in this country if you have a supermajority in Parliament. So if Farage wanted, he can do whatever he wants. He could basically come as Cromwell.
Hmm.
He could just repeal Blair in day one. He could just pass a bill saying every law passed since 1997 off, done. Supreme Court done. Ofcom done. Communications Act gone. Equality Act gone. He could do that. I just don't get any sense that he's willing to be anywhere near that sort of radical figure who's going to cleanse with fire. And it's in the name,
Hmm.
reform. And I guess one of the big questions is can the system as it stands now be reformed, or does it require, bypass surgery, like a proper, i.e., we need something bigger, like a heart transplant, or the change we need can't be done around the edges. We need proper radical change in this country if it's going to be saved from the trajectory that it's been in over the past 20, 30 years.
Well, let's linger on that for a moment. So, with regards to the country being in such a parlous state, I think we can probably trot off a few examples of how the regime has been quite nefarious, really. So, what have we seen over the last 30 years? We've seen the establishment lie its way to war in Iraq, as you point out, put down the Million Man March, and then still go on to win a majority in the election. We've seen phantom protests in response to the Southport massacre by Axel Rudikubana to try to shift attention to the far right and away from conversations about immigration. We've seen the astroturfing of the "Don't Look Back in Anger" response to the Manchester bombings in the arena following or during the Ariana Grande concert in 2017. And then you've mentioned digital ID cards, which are being billed as for ease, convenience, to counter immigration, to improve the welfare state. I suspect there's probably something else to it. And most recently, the abandonment of trial by jury has been proposed by the Justice Secretary, David Lammy. That goes back to the beginnings of Anglo-Saxon legal norms and was enshrined within the Magna Carta hundreds of years later. And so throughout all of these years, we've seen the state apparatus, private sector apparatus arraigned against the people in some way or against these norms that had become so a part of the nation.
Don't forget the biggest betrayal of all, John, under Alexander Johnson. He locked us down in our houses for COVID. Remember? We were under house arrest. And while we were all under house arrest, imported the biggest influx of foreigners the nation has ever seen, now known universally as Boris Wave. That has to go down as one of the biggest betrayals in the history of the nation by any leader. And I'd even include Churchill in that as well.
Yeah, the Boris Wave is definitely one that I think has roused people, whether they end up going for containment figures like reform or whatever is, there has been an immediate response to that, and people know that that is pure betrayal. And then to add to that, and certainly you cannot miss it, is there has been the obfuscation about the grooming gangs, which now that you have seen the transcripts that have been released by Open Justice, Adam Wren's little NGO, so to speak, these transcripts read somewhat like war crimes that are taking place on the soil of Britain, and that was all kept from people, or at least it was suppressed within the media. So you said, and you've mentioned cleansing fire already. You actually wrote, I think, toward the end of Applied Elite Theory, that there comes a time when an elite is so thoroughly corrupted that there needs to come a cleansing fire to start again. It's been 367 years since Oliver Cromwell did that last time. We are long overdue. Do you see any signs of the kindling of this cleansing fire, the signs of an organized minority that aren't containment, as you would see it?
The only glimmer on the horizon is in the twinkle of Rupert Lowe's eye. He's the only person who comes anywhere close to having the sort of kind of, he's got a kind of, I guess you call it like a devil may care attitude. He just doesn't seem to care about what people say or what people think. Maybe he's just too old to care, right? Or maybe he's, because he's independently wealthy or whatever. He strikes me as someone who has the potential. He may be a little bit old, but in a figure like Rupert Lowe, I see the potential to be that, the person who will do what is necessary. I don't see it in Farage, I'm afraid. He just seems to be an overly cautious figure, and we're not in a time that requires, there could have been a moment where Farage was the right man. Maybe he was the right man for Brexit, but for what needs to be done now, we need people of a slightly different stripe, in my opinion.
Do you think that reform, should they come to power, if they do, big if, you never know, but people do seem to be very sick of Labour and the Tories. If they do come to power, should it be tinkering around the edges and not going for the right, let's strike through the Blairite revolution that took place in 97, where effectively the British Constitution was rewritten, the judiciary was reconstituted to be very un-British and not in line with common law, really. Do you think if he doesn't do that, if he doesn't do the full cleansing fire, that's just people checking out at that point? Or do you think that we've become so bovine with the news cycle and just change, and we forget about these betrayals and these things quite quickly, that we'd just rumble along and just grumble? Or is that too much of a cynical view to take?
I do think that there's not. I don't think that any system can indefinitely seem hostile to the population. And one of the problems that Labour has had is that Keir Starmer has too often seemed hostile to the nation. And in fact, it's reared its head recently with the budget, with Rachel Reeves blaming everybody else and lashing out. And oh, hold on a second, you are the Chancellor. It's not everybody else. It's like you're the government. You're there. You've got accountability, and you're there to sort it out. And Labour at the moment just seem to be against everybody. Like the rich, the poor, the working class. I mean, I don't know who they're playing. Keir Starmer's played one of the worst political games I have ever seen any person do ever. And I don't know if a system can rumble on indefinitely being actively hostile to the people that they rule over. It doesn't matter what, if you call it democracy, if you call it dictatorship, it doesn't matter. Every system in the end needs some sort of unity between the leaders and the people they rule over. Otherwise, there will be conflict in the future. Now, I have been critical of David Betts and people who prophesy civil war and things like that. I don't see the conditions for that. But in a scenario where they don't do what I describe as competent containment, i.e., if reform come in and really, really just carry on let's pretend Farage comes in and does a Boris, or there's a Nigel Wave or something like that. I think the British establishment would truly be dicing with danger. Then I think people would start to get organised and collectivised at that point, because the anger is already very high in the country. But it takes an awful lot for that to actually become something tangible. At the moment, I would say the establishment is probably doing enough, right, for people to be watching, sort it out. But that is not an indefinite piece of. So, come the mid 2030s or something, if there's not big change in the next 10 years, then anything is possible, I would suggest.
Rewinding a bit to your David Betts refutation. So he recently came onto the podcast, and as people will be very aware, he's the professor or scholar of war at King's College London that talks about how the conditions seem to be ripe or ripening for civil war in various European nations. And he says this is because of various reasons. You've got a downgrading of the native population, a kind of replacement migration, people getting frustrated that there seems to be a self-funding of a colonization taking place on their own shores, and then seeing the tools of the state and the private sector arraigned against them with regards to job opportunities, judicial system. And he thinks that there's a kind of a rising thumos, I guess, or I might be putting words in his mouth because I spoke to him about this, both of the native population, but also it's already present within the groups that have arrived who are potentially continuing their own ways. But as you've said, you don't see the conditions for that. So let's do the counterpoint. Why do you think that civil war, as Betts describes it, isn't likely?
Well, there's a chapter in here. It's called, it's right, it's the very final chapter. It's called "Is Civil War Coming to Britain?" in page 272. And, as per applied elite theory, what I do is I ask all the practical questions. Where's the funding coming from? Who's doing the organising? If people are going to get organised, how do they overcome the permanent infiltrations of the security state, which is very good at infiltrating and breaking up any attempt at organisation that they perceive as a rival to themselves, as all states are. British state is particularly good at that. If anything, it's too vigilant. The British state is too vigilant to the point where people like George Galloway are being stopped at airports, various other people that we know have been stopped at airports, okay? Under counter-terrorism. I mean, if you're stopping people like that, can you imagine if you were actually involved in some sort of conspiracy or some sort? So what I'm saying is, if they're stopping people like that, you can bet yourself that they, if anything is becoming any threat becoming real, they're already there, and they're pretty good at that. So that's a significant hurdle to overcome. Another thing is just other simple things like, I mean, he loves to draw the comparison with the troubles in Northern Ireland, but the sides there had massive backing. On the Northern Irish side, they're literally the British state. From the Irish side, huge backing from the States, from America, from the Irish diaspora, and also, you know, from other powers within America, even people in who had political power at that time. So it's and there was weapons and there was various other things. So I still think it's a little bit fantastical
Mm.
to you know make these sorts of claims. Now he's the expert, he's the professor of war or whatever. He thinks that the things that I've said in that essay are silly. I think that if you're going to claim there's going to be a civil war or civil conflict coming, the burden of proof is on you. And at the moment, it looks fantastical to me. People are still full of bread and circuses, like Piers Morgan. People are eating their curries, watching Netflix, playing on their iPhones. It's going to
Mm.
take a lot to jolt people into the sort of action that we saw during the Troubles, in my view. So,
Well, I'm sure that would give comfort to some people who are worried about Betts's predictions, and I suppose we'll see what comes to pass. Final question, Neema, and it is a question that I've asked you before, but we'll see if anything's changed. So I like to ask my guests if there's anything they've changed their mind on. The last time we spoke, you'd said, well, loads, because you'd given up all your liberal priors that you had. You've been a Blair voter, a Remain voter, but then various things changed you, which was reading Jonathan Haidt's Righteous Mind, Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, and also seeing the establishment reaction to things like Brexit made you start looking behind the curtain. Well, given that you also said that changing your mind is a constant process, what else have you changed your mind on?
well, I mean, as I say in the introduction of this book, I've been very disillusioned with what is known as the online right. I mean, there's an essay in here that says the online right is entirely fake. Um, I have been. I mean, maybe I shouldn't be disillusioned, right? Maybe I shouldn't be disillusioned. Maybe I should have expected it. But the extent to which people want to hold on to copes and not tell the truth, the extent to which people are willing to turn a blind eye, the extent to which people are cowardly, um, the extent to which in America the obvious glaring flaws and failings of Trump 2.0. When I came into this thing, the the thing that made it vibrant, the thing that made it alive, was fiercely telling the truth, following evidence, and not being worried about taboo or not being worried about what other people think. Just fearlessly telling the truth. And unfortunately, over the past 12 months to 2 years, two things have happened. One is that online spaces have become more and more infiltrated by money, by special interests, by uh, you know, possibly even regime compliant figures, but people who are not as independent as they appear. That's
Mm.
one. And much of that has been exposed over the past year. It wasn't clear 2 years ago or 3 years ago. It's become a lot more clear due to various different things. That's one thing that's happened. The second thing that has happened is that I think many people, it's like, how can you read Populist Delusion or James Burnham or be aware of the things that we talk about and then devolve and degenerate into being a mindless cheerleader for the Trump admin? It just doesn't make any sense to me, especially when it's obvious that they have become beholden to special interests.
Mm.
Right now, when that happened, because I cannot, I maybe it's some like curse I've been given, John, that I have to tell the truth. I can't turn a blind eye to that. I will call it out, and it irritates me. But it is sufficiently large on both sides of the pond. Here in Britain is even worse, by the way. The Americans actually are not as bad as us in this country. The
Mm.
British right is even worse when it comes to these sorts of things. I can't. I mean, so that's the main thing, is that I'm not willing to stand. I'm not willing to say, well, I'm part of this thing, online right or whatever. So I've taken to saying sensible centre left for all sorts of reasons.
Hmm. Well,
Um,
you'd
yeah,
said you're probably more closer to John Gray's worldview than others, and I actually think probably quite a few people who found themselves aligned to the dissident right, online right, are probably really those old school Carlylean social democrats, in some respects, than
yeah,
than they would be on the right, and it was just because, as you mentioned, there were some early figures on the right who started to tell the truth, and that made people go, "Oh yeah, I'm definitely not part of whatever this is that's currently got the strings of power." Is there anyone that you think is doing a good job online, right or left, that you think people would be worth
yeah.
following, other than your good self, of course?
Tucker Carlson, and
Okay.
he's one of the biggest. He's probably the biggest one for a reason,
Hmm.
because he's doing a good job at the moment. So yeah, Tucker. I'm big
Hmm.
on him at the moment.
And what would you say to the viewers? So you've agreed on a journey. We've mentioned Kahneman and Haidt. If people were to want to engage in value-free analysis, get behind the curtain, and understand how powers work, what advice would you give them?
Well, he could do worse than read this book, Applied Elite Theory.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I also think those books that you just mentioned, understanding the gap between your emotional, kind of intuitive gut reaction to things and actual reason and evidence. Karma calls it system 1 and 2 thinking. How do you actually engage that system 2 brain? And at the moment, and this is where I get so frustrated, John, we are bombarded with what I call slop on a daily basis. So many things to get excited about and outraged about, and so much stuff is being flung at you. Some of it's fake, some of it's real. How do you kind of not react to? How do you kind of rise above some of it, maintain your sanity, keep that objective gaze? It takes quite a lot of discipline. Um, One of the writers I like to think about, now he's considered right wing, John, right? But is Julius Evola.
Hmm.
His book Ride the Tiger is pretty good on this, right? Because that's a whole book about how are you surrounded with the kind of what he calls the Kali Yuga, the world, everything's going to shit. You're surrounded by degeneracy, daily outrages, and so on. How don't you how do you keep yourself from driving you insane? How do you keep all of that at bay? How do you hold yourself upright, become a man, like a man of steel against it
Hmm.
all, so that the modernity just breaks on you? And that book, Ride the Tiger, is very good, on that particular thing. Even if you don't like the rest of Evola's works, that one book I do recommend to people.
Hmm. Well, on the topic of books, let's finish off with a plug. So, Applied Elite Theory is out now in all good bookshops. But what else are you working on, and where can people find your works?
Well, I'm on YouTube, Academic Agent. I have a Substack under my own name. It's called Forbidden Texts. It's under my own name now. I do have another book coming out soon on Shakespeare. Um,
Hmm.
I don't know when exactly it will come out, but that is going to be like they call it a prestige edition. It's a big hardback. Looks
Wow,
almost like a folio book. Um, but I'm
that's cool.
excited about it. They've done a really good job on that, and it's kind of like my Shakespeare greatest hits, if you want. It's a kind of good one shot, non woke intro to Shakespeare. So that's coming out soon. Maybe I'll have to do another bunch of interviews to promote that.
Well, Neema, it's been an absolute pleasure as always. Thanks so much for coming on the show.